Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third of our sessions today. This one's focusing very much on the role of the IT supplier. Now, for those of you that have been with me, have been with us actually for the majority of the day, I apologise, I'm going to repeat this again. This session is being recorded and it will be available on playback from hopefully tomorrow and then available on the website. There is a copy of the slides which is in the pull-out section in your GoToWebinar control panel where the handout side is, and please feel free to ask questions as we go through. This session is absolutely for you guys, so if you've got questions or if we're using acronyms that you don't perhaps understand, then just shout out. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by another member of the Risk Evolves team. We've got Mandy Sutton with us. So Mandy is my, for want of a better word, she's my queen of cyber essentials. Mandy is our go-to person whenever we work with clients on cyber essentials. And the reason we put this session together is, you know, I set up Risk Evolves just over 6 years ago now, coming towards 7 years, and we've worked with some amazing IT providers. But I think it's fair to say there's some not so amazing IT providers out there. So Mandy and I have really pooled our knowledge and experience, and what we thought we'd share with you is what makes a good IT provider. That's the objective of the session. So without further ado, just quickly wanted to share some stats. 34% of businesses outsource their IT. I actually thought it was going to be a bit higher than that, but according to a YouGov survey from a couple of years ago, 34% of businesses outsource their IT, and they do that for a variety of reasons. Predominantly, it's because they don't have the qualified staff, and certainly when Mandy and I talk to clients, you know, IT is a complex and it's a fast-moving environment, and what we absolutely know is unless you can make the investment in your own organisation to make sure that your staff have got the up-to-date knowledge and experience, then actually outsourcing is probably going to be the better route for you. 30% do it because it achieves better results, and that goes back to that experience perspective. And you can read the other points there. Some say it's because it's cheaper, and 28% say it's more efficient. So we know that a significant chunk of organisations outsource their IT. And don't forget, those organisations could very well be in your supply chain, and they could also be your clients. So lots of good reasons why we look at IT. The challenge is really, how do you select a good IT provider? And I liken this to, you know, one of the problems with IT is it is a complex environment. It's full of jargon, it's full of intrigue, it's full of threats, it's full of good guys, it's full of bad guys. It is an unregulated industry at the moment. So unlike other professions, you know, accountancy, solicitors, etc., there is no regulatory body overseeing managed service providers yet. There is potential some legislation coming down the pipe in the next 12-18 months that may change that. And I think one of the challenges is we all know, if we were to outsource cleaning of our offices, for example, we all know what a good cleaner looks like. We all know whether the bins have been emptied and so on and so forth. But for an IT provider, it's so much more complicated. So what Mandy and I thought we'd share is just how to select a good IT provider. So Mandy, this is a checklist that we kind of pulled together, and it's absolutely not exhaustive, is it? There are always other things that you can ask an IT provider. But do you want to just go through some of the points here that we've put together and explain your thinking and actually some of the experience that you've seen in this space as well?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, just to run through quickly. You think it wouldn't really matter how many they've got in their team, but if there's just one or two of them, then what happens when one of them gets abducted by aliens, and where is all of your information, and what's going to happen? It doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't use a person who works on their own, but there needs to be a backup. You need to know what would happen if they're not available. And so when we talk about this is the second point, service level agreement, you need to know what they're actually doing for you, because they won't be doing everything. You're going to have to make sure that you sweep up around the edges if they're not doing everything. They might say they have a complete cyber security suite that you've bought from them, but then I mean, I'm sure this wouldn't happen, but you might say, well, what antivirus have we got? And they might say, oh, well, that's not included. Did you want that as well?
Yeah.
So you need to know exactly what you've got and what it does for you, and sort of going on from that, what is covered in the contract and what's expected from them. And what's expected from you? What are you expected to provide for them? So things that are not covered. So, for instance, if some of the hardware fails, are they going to help out with that, or are they just looking at software and operating systems? One very good question to ask is, do they have cyber essentials? And if anyone says what, then really
walk
that
away.
tells you.
Walk away. Yeah.
The Uninitiated Cyber Essentials is a great scheme where you can get an accreditation that says your IT security meets a certain standard. It's self-assessed, but you would need your IT provider to be on board with that. And if your provider doesn't necessarily have to have cyber essentials, but an awareness of it and the fact that they have helped other clients with cyber essentials is a really good indicator that they understand what cybersecurity is really about.
And actually, Mandy, as a follow-up to that as well, you just prompted to remind me as well that the follow-on question is how would they support you with data privacy and the GDPR? So I was talking to a client's IT provider, and I had that same tumbleweed moment as well. They'd never heard of data privacy and specifically the GDPR, which was, you know, information security and data privacy, they're two sides of the identical coin, aren't they? So, and we also know that if you end up with, if you're asked to support and run a subject access request, your IT provider is absolutely critical to helping you in that process. So if they say, I don't quite understand what you mean, that would, for me, would absolutely be a warning bell.
Yeah, and references and providing references and following them up. I mean, if they've got other clients who are happy to talk to you and say how wonderful they are, then that's great. If you're if your setup is Microsoft, you're looking for them to have some sort of association with Microsoft to know that they've got a hotline should anything go wrong. Something else I'm going to add to that list is do they talk to you in English or do they talk to you in jargon? Because there are two ways of looking at this. If they talk to you in basic English and try and shield you from all of the technical stuff, that is absolutely great because you can understand what they're talking about. But you do need to know what the technical stuff is, even if it's a piece of paper listing it and putting the details on the contract so that you can Google some of the things that are in the contract. If they talk to you purely in jargon and talk down to you, then that's definitely a no-no because you are partners. You are definitely working together with
absolutely. Absolutely, I can remember famously we were doing cyber essentials with an IT provider, and the IT provider said to the client in front of me, that's really quite complicated, you won't understand it. And I felt, yeah, your reaction there, Mandy, says it all. That was one of our not quite so good IT providers, and unfortunately the client then moved, well, fortunately for the client, unfortunately for the IT provider, the client then chose to move his business just on that one throwaway remark. It's too complicated, you wouldn't understand it, which for me was an indication that the IT provider couldn't or wasn't prepared to help the client understand the very point that they were trying to make. They weren't prepared to take the time or to, as you say, just draw a picture. We've just come from a call where Anna's very kindly described what a VPN is. It's a tunnel, it's a fixed tunnel. You don't need to be complicated. IT can be de-jargoned to make it easier for people to understand. So we've called the session Abdication or Delegation. There's a reason why we've done that. Classic dictionary definitions, delegation, abdication, what do we mean? So, and this applies actually to any outsourcing relationship. It's not just around your IT provider. Delegation is you're giving somebody, as it says there, the opportunity and responsibility of doing something for you, but the responsibility and the accountability for that action remains with you. Abdication is where you just pass it across and you wash your hands of it. For us, it's always really, really important that you do not abdicate responsibility for your IT. The IT, and I've already mentioned the GDPR, but there are other pieces of legislation which are really important, but it's critical to your business. It's going to hold your customer information. It will be, chances are, it will be the lifeblood of your operation. If you switch off your IT, then there is undoubtedly going to be an impact on your business. It may be that you can't issue invoices, perhaps you can't issue invoices out to clients, perhaps you can't pay your staff, perhaps you can't get proposals out to clients and so on. IT will have, or the absence of IT will absolutely impact your business. So therefore, delegating responsibility but retaining accountability within your organisation is absolutely key. So how do we do that? And Mandy, again, you do this quite regularly. We manage an outsourced relationship, don't we? And when it comes to IT providers, we do that in probably quite a specific way. Do you want to go through any of these points and why they're so important? And you've mentioned Cyber Essentials, and many of these aspects align with Cyber Essentials.
Yes, the things that you need to be asking for are as listed here in terms of what they're doing for you and what they're monitoring. Cyber Essentials, and Helen probably will tell me off for saying this, but even if you didn't actually go for the certification on Cyber Essentials, the whole thing is basically, it's a big guidance document that says, well, it isn't even that big. It's a guidance document that sits into 5 areas and talks in some technical language, but gives you a framework that you can actually quiz your IT provider on. And it's freely available. You can download the guidance document, and you can use that as a basis for talking to your IT provider about what they're doing for you, and identifying little bits and pieces that are missing.
And the very first one there, patch management and software updates, for anybody that's just come from the call, we've had again with Anna and with James talking about remote working. You'll have heard James Squire from Warwickshire Police talk very much around making sure your devices are up to date, making sure your patches are up to date. For those that are not necessarily technically aware, that's those really annoying messages that pop up at really inopportune time saying your software is going to be updated. Or it's the box on your phone that says that there's some number of updates that have got to be made to the apps that you've got on your phone. Those are one of the layers of defence that we have to stopping the criminal get in. And therefore, if you've outsourced your relationship to your IT provider, if you've got an outsourced IT provider, your IT provider should be coming to you and telling you how they are managing patches on your behalf. Now, my IT provider, he sends me a monthly report and he tells me on a monthly basis all the information that's logged there, as do a number of the really good IT providers. One of the things that my IT provider also does as well is he has, and he doesn't need to come to me for my permission, he has the ability to switch a user off if he can see that for whatever reason their patches and their software updates are not applied to their devices. Now, why does he do that? So Cyber Essentials as Mandy's already said, is the government flagship scheme. So Cyber Essentials requires that critical patches are applied within 14 days of them being issued. So what my IT provider says, if we get to day 14 and those patches are still not on, he will force them on. And one of the ways he can force them on is by taking a user offline. Now, I'm delighted to say that none of the employees for Risk Evolves have ever come to me and say, the IT providers just switched us off the system, because that would be a difficult conversation. But we do it because it's not just the right thing to do, we do it because it's a mechanism of protecting the business. Mandy, in that list we've got malware. So do you want to just give an example of what malware is and why, again, that's really important?
Absolutely. I mean, on a basic level, if you go and buy a computer, Windows computer from Currys, and you bring it home, start it up, that's going to have anti-malware on it because it'll come with Windows Defender. The problems start when you might get halfway through installing another antivirus, and so it switches off Windows Defender and you never quite finish installing the new one. So you've always got to make sure that you've got your anti-malware. With an IT provider, they will look after that for you, and they will have something that's got a bit more beef than Windows Defender, and it'll incorporate all sorts of extra security features. But they need to be able to manage it, and they need to be able to tell you that all of the anti-malware. I mean, we say anti-malware now, which covers what we used to you used to call it antivirus, but there are other threats other than viruses, and it all goes together under malware. So we need to make sure that.
We do. Access management's really key as well. So knowing who is accessing your system, when they're accessing, where they're accessing is also important. And I've kind of put access management included in there, two-factor authentication as well. So again, one of the requirements, and so one of the requirements of the new Cyber Essentials question set, which comes into play in January of next year, is around access management, two-factor authentication, making sure that we only have the right users logged onto the system. At risk of roles, and I'm sure other companies have got this. If I want to introduce a new user onto the system, the IT provider will come back to me personally and say, I've just had a request to add Joe Bloggs onto the risk of roles tenancy. Is that genuine? So again, we have that double check to make sure that we're controlling the environment. And one of the first layers of defense is to make sure, if the IT provider makes sure on my behalf that that isn't being managed unnecessarily. And similarly within that, we've also got privileged access management. Mandy, do you want to just explain what privileged access management is? Because this can cause all sorts of emotions, can't it? Especially when we're doing Cyber Essentials with clients.
Yes, absolutely. If we're talking about privileges in terms of what you're allowed to do on your own machine, then we don't want you to be able, I mean, I don't want my user login to be able to install any software, because if I get something with a link in it that I think is just a link to a document, but actually it's got a link in it that installs some software, if I've got reduced privileges on my my user account, it means that I can't actually install that software until somebody comes along and says, yes, that's okay, that's fine. I'm going to override. I'll put in a password to make that happen, and that's it's not about taking control away from end users. It's about security and safety.
Absolutely.
If you are, for instance, I run my system, my home system myself. So I give myself a user account with no privileges to install anything. And there's a separate account, which is an admin account, which enables me to log in as an admin to do anything that's needed. And that's what your IT provider will do. They will be the admin and look after all of the tough stuff at the back end. And you just have to get on with your job.
And on the similar point to that as well, your IT provider should, and again, you can ask the IT provider how they do this, but your IT provider should have similar processes in-house to make sure that the team that support you only have admin privileges and admin rights when they need to have it, but they're not running with admin rights and privileges switched on and active all the time. It's typically not necessary. Software license usage, this is an interesting one, isn't it, Mandy, around what licenses are in place, and are all the licenses being used, overused, misused, etc. I know you mentioned that you had a case about this a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, we've got, we had a situation where we had a number of users sharing a license for Microsoft Office. So the same license has been used on 4 or 5 machines, and we've got the same sign-in. So someone's been sharing passwords to get onto the system, which of course is incredibly insecure because someone leaves and is still using that same password. The other part of that was that when they actually reviewed it, they had something like a dozen licenses that they'd bought and they hadn't applied. So they didn't actually even need to do the license sharing. They just needed to be more organised, and the IT provider needed to take control of that and say, well, let's do a bit of an audit on who needs what. Let's reduce the license count, because especially with Microsoft 365 these days, it's just so easy to reduce the licenses. Even if you've got like a vacancy for a couple of months, reduce your license count while you haven't got the people there and you've got machines out of action. Be on it. Make sure everyone has got their individual license for the software. But you might
there's definitely a cost saving, isn't there, when you do that? Yeah. Absolutely. Backups, simple one. It might sound an obvious one, but make sure your systems are being backed up. Don't assume they're being backed up. Ask when they were last backed up, and as importantly, and again, James alluded to this when we were talking previously about ransomware, test your backups. There's no point having a backup that doesn't function. And again, that conversation with the IT provider, just going through periodically saying, how are we doing on this? How are we doing on this? How are we doing on that is really, really important.
Could I just add
monitoring and logging?
Sorry, could I just add on in terms of backups? Test your backup, yes, but what is the procedure? Know what your procedure is, because it's all very well saying, yes, we've got a backup. Well, how do I get it? So if you've got your files on a server and your server dies, what is the process? Not only what do we have to do, we have to buy a new server, we have to build it, put all the data back on. How long will that take? How long will I be without my data? Also, if you've got if you're restoring from backup because you've lost the entire server, is it a daily backup, or is it an incremental backup where you're taking snapshots through the day? Because if your server dies at 5 o'clock one evening and you've got a daily backup at 6 o'clock, you've lost an entire day's work. These are things you need to know.
Good point, absolutely good point. And actually some of that goes in quite nicely to the next point in terms of monitoring and logging. It's not exciting. Monitoring and logs in an IT environment are typically not very exciting, and they're normally there just for when things go wrong. So when things go wrong, it may be perhaps an employee has been taking information from the system and maybe wanting to either share it with a new business or take it for their own needs and outcomes. It's really important that your IT provider has got evidence of what's going on there. Similarly, we were talking to one of our forensics partners the other week, and they were talking about a case where they'd investigated a ransomware attack, and the IT provider was not doing any monitoring and not doing any logs, which meant that they were unable to investigate how the hackers had managed to get into the system because there was no evidence to go back over. So not exciting, but just ask your IT provider, what are they monitoring? What are they logging? How long are they keeping those logs for? Is it 7 days? Is it a month? Is it longer? So in the event that you need to go back and look at what's happened, is there anything there that you could review? And I think the final point on this is really summed up in it should be advice and partnership. It shouldn't just be a transactional relationship with your IT provider. They should be coming and working alongside you to support your business. One of the things we would always encourage you to do is just ask and understand whether or not your IT provider knows and understands what your business does. It sounds so obvious, but do they just see you as yet another IT provider, yet another client? Are they going to support X number of desktops or laptops? Do they actually understand what your business does and how important that is to you? Are you going to enter into a partnership with them, or is it just simply transactional? Mandy, any other comments? We're almost at the bottom of the half hour, so I'm a little bit conscious on time, and we do have a question that's come in on licenses as well.
No, I think we moved to Q&A because we could talk for hours.
We could, yes. And the key here is around transparency, isn't it? So the question that's come in, and again on being transparent, is around licenses. The question that's come in is, are they all fixed price, or is there any differences in the license price? For example, are there any reductions for charities?
Oh, absolutely. The charities get enormous discounts from Microsoft. You have to jump through a few hoops to qualify, and you have to be a registered charity. But you do get some very good deals from Microsoft with charities.
And similarly, that should be one of those questions that's asked, shouldn't it, right at the beginning of the relationship. If you're a charity, you say to your IT provider, how are you going to support us? And one of the first things they should be saying is, we'll look at your license structure and see whether we can get any reductions of those license fees. I think there's similar reductions as well, isn't there, for education? I'm not so familiar with the education sector, but I believe there's license packages, isn't there, for education as well?
Yes. Yeah, there's a whole set of licenses.
Brilliant. So IT providers are an interesting space. We could also talk a little bit more about them when it comes to data privacy and the GDPR. We'll pick up on that at 4 o'clock this evening when we're talking about updates to the GDPR and updates in the data privacy world. If anybody's got any questions, if you just want to pop them into the questions or chat box, that'd be brilliant. We'll pick them up. In the meantime, before I close the session, I will say that there will be a feedback questionnaire that comes out to you. It's automatically generated, which asks broadly how useful have you found this webinar? Are there any other sessions that you'd like to see? What ideas would you like to see in the future? They are for you, our customers, and for other individuals as well. We do have our first set of webinars already outlined for Q1 2022. I can't believe I'm saying Q1 2022. We are in December, and those will be on the 17th of March. And as already mentioned as well, we have a number of other sessions that are running throughout the day. Please feel free to join them or pick up on the recordings as they're loaded onto the Risk Involved events webpage later in the week. All that remains for me to say is thank you for everybody for joining, and thank you to Mandy as well for sharing some of her insights and some of her experience on IT situations that she's looked at and managed as well. Otherwise, all that remains for me to say is thank you very much for joining. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.